record here. Most of you know, again, we're giving away one of her books. When she's done speaking right now, I will go ahead and do that giveaway right after, but we are giving away, I'll split my screen. Tyler, you can go ahead and put on your video. Let me pin myself here. We're going to be giving away this book at the end. And I'm laughing at myself because in all of my genius, I did my spinning wheel on the wrong computer because I was trying to keep you guys moving faster. And so I will have to be doing it from this and we'll be like, yay, you won. But you'll see your names. I put your names all on there and I'll keep double checking. But Tyler, we're excited to have you. We're getting her to unmute. We're going to love this. We're not hearing you yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was I supposed to start talking?
You are on. I just can't see you.
Well, it says video is on, so that's kind of weird. Maybe it's because it doesn't like this. Let's see. Still can't see me.
Yeah.
That's odd because it says I am on.
Yeah, it shows here you're on too. It's, you know. It's,
it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Oh, well, this is a share screen. Does that need to be off? I don't know.
Are you doing are you doing a PowerPoint for us today?
No, I am not.
Yeah.
No, I'm just talking.
Just talk to us then.
All right. So yeah, my name's Tyler Dawn Rosenquist.
Let's try turning off your video. I'm just turned it off, and then let's try turning you back on. See if that somehow magically.
Are you going to do that? Turn me back on?
I just turned you off, so turn yourself back on now.
Does it do it?
No, not weird.
That's weird because my video, let's see if I pull up my camera, my video is working. Let's see, let's just turn that off. Maybe it doesn't like, that is so strange. I've never had this problem on
yeah, we've chatted before lots on this, so
yeah,
it's just cause well
maybe you can play with it while I'm
I will, while you just keep on going. You just keep chat with us.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, my name's Tyler Dawn Rosenquist, and I'm a homeschooling graduate now. I was also very terrible at it because just because you can teach on the radio and you can write books and you get A's and everything doesn't mean that your kids are going to respond. It's kind of crazy. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about critical failure, why our kids are abandoning the Bible and faith, and it is a big problem with a lot of homeschooling parents that I've talked to. And I don't care who you are or how you live or what kind of example you've been. Your kids might walk away from the Bible and from the faith entirely. You have to understand and be prepared for that possibility. It requires a lot of humility to even consider it, which we often lack, and it necessitates prayer and trust in God. We cannot guarantee anything about the future lives of our children. Goodness, we can't even guarantee today. We do our best and hope that they'll love God and surrender their lives to Jesus, but this is not a battle we can win in the flesh or through any specific curriculum or homeschooling method. Parenting isn't about guarantees, but mostly about flying by the seat of our pants and hoping against hope for positive results. Having this mindset has been a must for me and kept me sane during my 4 years of homeschooling my now 21-year-old twin boys, one of whom is physically and developmentally disabled, and the other supposedly normal, but as you all know, all you boy moms and dads can attest to, there is nothing normal about boys. So, and I say that lovingly, from the time they turn 15 months old till the time someone else buries them, they're generally a handful unless you get one of those quiet, studious ones. I didn't. I think my boys were born late enough in the day they'd already run out of those, and they were the wild ones left. And sometimes we think we should try and tame them, and maybe we should. After all, who of us has not been tamed since we found our salvation at the foot of the cross and inside that empty tomb, right? Sometimes we forget, though, that it was not the Bible that tamed us in any real way, but a relationship. The Bible can be seen by children as the enemy when we use it in ways for them that don't reflect our experience with the divine. So we have to be careful, else they end up like the wayward spiritual children of Israel, who had a whole lot of do's and don'ts, but no indwelling of the Holy Spirit to write those commandments on their hearts in such a way that becomes important to them. This love of God and neighbor. Now, every religion on earth has rules and ethics, and everyone can follow rules and observe community morality if they set their mind to it. But what sets the followers of Jesus apart is that they're being transformed from within. And, guess what? We can tell the stories and we can live it out in front of them and we can hold them to our notion of what biblical standards look like. But what we cannot do is open their eyes and draw them to our Savior. And, that's God's work. And so it's of the utmost importance that while we're telling them the stories and impressing upon them the beauty of the Word of God, that we create a hunger within them for what we have. And for that, we have to constantly be changing toward perfection, and they need to see it. And, furthermore, they need to understand that it isn't about anything that we're doing in our own power. All right. We're following the leader, and we are largely the people who will show our kids whether or not that leader is worth following and whether that leader can and should be trusted. Our maturity in the faith, it matters. It's a situation of life and death. My kids have seen my journey because I became a believer a mere 2 years before we adopted them at birth. And it isn't my constant Bible reading and studying that has impressed upon them the reality of God, because, anyone can read books. But instead, how they've watched me struggle and change and blow it and apologize and make amends. Despite all of their biblical education, they aren't readers. They just aren't. And so their father and I are the only Bible they have right now. They were the guinea pigs for every single one of my Bible curriculum books, but they're also at that age where they are discovering what it means to be grown-ups. And I love some of their decisions and I hate others, but it's in God's hands now. And I'm just grateful that they still come to me when they have questions about what the Bible says about this or that. But what I want to talk to you about is why they still ask me questions and why they know that nothing is off limits. You see, I handled homeschooling differently than what I see from the majority of believing parents, and I did it actually quite by accident. And it had the unintentional effect of leaving the door open to my sons while they are deciding who they are and what they want to be and how God is going to figure into all that. And your kids will go through that too. Some sooner, some later. Everyone goes through it differently. Excuse me. I've got an itch in my throat today. Everyone goes through it differently. And we've all seen those young golden children who, in quotes, who look like ministerial prodigies, and they turn from the faith because they grew up within a culture and, not as sinners, fundamentally changed by the cross. And, I don't blame them. It isn't like you can really tell if someone's saved or not. For parents, generally good behavior is enough to convince us that our kids are believers, but anyone can behave, and especially the compliant ones like I was. Everyone can say the right things to please their parents and set their minds at ease. And okay, well, that wasn't me, but that's why I'm I'm not going to be anywhere in person talking without a script, because that can be disastrous. I'll never forget the time I went off script and told viewers that instead of teaching adults via video, I instead announced that I made adult videos. So, if you ever hear that rumor, I am the one who started it. And it's kind of true. Now, from the time my boys were preschoolers, I taught them critical thinking in some fun ways. And mostly it involved my telling them something ridiculous and ludicrous and looking into their trusting little eyes and saying, now, do you think that's true? Tell me why that does or does not make sense. And we talk about it, and sometimes they would talk to one another about it because with them being twins, I was definitely the third wheel in that relationship. But before they would run off to play, I would always tell them the truth. And I made sure to really drive home the reality that just because they love me and depend on me and trust me doesn't mean that I am always going to be right about everything. Grown-ups lie. They misjudge their level of knowledge and expertise in areas. They fall for and pass on someone else's lies, or they mistake their opinions for truth. And all of us do it, whether we like it or not, whether we really understand it or not. Allowing them to understand my take on things, that my take on things can be questioned, that they can ask me questions, knowing that I will be honest if all I can give them is an educated or uneducated guess, or I will just flat out tell them that I just do not know the answer to things. It's bolstered their confidence in me as someone they can actually take their questions to. If I have no idea, I won't pretend like I do. And not just on the Bible, but other topics too. Honesty and credibility begin with our being honest about what we do and do not know, and being open to new information. Now, critical thinking requires honesty and credibility, along with learning how to use logic, as well as understanding that just because something seems logical to us, it doesn't mean that we had enough expertise to even make that judgment. Critical thinking begins and ends with our honest evaluation of our own level of understanding, experience, and limitations. And most kids and even homeschoolers never learn critical thinking because we parents are often fooled into believing that teaching and an alternate view from what they teach in public schools represents critical thinking, when all we have done is to indoctrinate them in another view that they are not allowed to question, namely our views. Now, I found out in my first year of homeschooling that I was very much indoctrinating my kids every bit as much as any public school could. And I'm not going to lie, we have had wonderful public school experiences in 6 different school districts, so I am not anti-public school. Among other things, I had my kids absolutely convinced that the end times were close enough that they stopped caring about being adults because they never thought that they would be adults. And I didn't even believe that myself, that everything was just, there about to happen. I was just reading the Bible to them, and I probably said things they just didn't understand. But, I also taught them long before homeschooling started to revere a lot of urban legends about Christmas and Easter origins, because I hadn't yet begun to delve into responsible scholarship. I thought I was teaching them to think critically, but what I was really doing was simply presenting a different, unquestionable narrative. And if that sounds familiar, you're not alone. We do it. We're stupid. We figure it out. We do better. Hopefully, we admit it and reverse course, because kids learn more from us doing that than just about anything else. Now, the truth is, I had to learn to think critically about the Bible before I could teach my children that it was okay to question and wrestle, like Abraham and Joseph Jacob and Moses and the psalmists and the prophets and many others did. Because if we don't allow them to think critically about the Bible and about faith, we are one, being unbiblical in our approach to faith. Two, leaving them helpless to the honest challenges, questions, and wrestlings that others will present them with as they get older. Three, setting them up for failure because they might only have a relationship with a set of unassailable do's and don'ts, which makes us comfortable at our age without any of the realities. They may not have any of the realities of an actual relationship with God. And relationships are messy, and so are hard and fast rules. And they might be legalistic instead of wise. And we're going to talk about those today, or I am. Anyway, so disclaimer, I am neither a scholar nor a theologian, but I play one on the radio. And seriously, about 10 years ago, I began to dive deeply into the Olympic-sized pool of biblical scholarship. And I think the first book I read was David De Silva's Honor, Patronage, Kinship, and Purity, Unlocking New Testament Culture. And my brain exploded, which actually probably explains a lot. No, I became obsessed with biblical sociology, as my Amazon bill attests to. It changed how I read everything. And different scholars had different opinions based on their field of expertise. And when they were all combined, the Bible becomes this beautiful mosaic highlighting the story of God's rescue plan for humanity while teaching us wisdom and love and compassion and hospitality and humility and presenting us with conflicting commandments that force us to cleave to him, to wrestle with him, and to continually, be depending on his wisdom and begging him for a larger share of it. And I learned about covenants and these obscure passages in the Bible. It was like I'd been living in a dark room and someone flipped on a switch. The point is that we cannot think critically without experience, exposure, and wisdom. Experience in relationship with God and others, alerts us when a verse about God and our responsibility toward others are, being taken out of context and manipulated and misrepresented. We need to know who God is and isn't before we go out trying to be his ambassadors in the world, and especially before we try and model him for our kiddos. Exposure is almost as important, and it's actually the least utilized, and especially within fundamentalism and triumphalistic denominations. If all we have are approved interpretations, we will be incapable of thinking critically, and if we're not allowed to be exposed to people who see things differently, we will have no other choice than to assume that there is only one way to look at a passage. Quashing questions and shaming and discouraging the questioner are all ways of stomping out the dangers of exposure to new ideas. But a faith that doesn't allow of any alternatives isn't a faith at all, because faith is inherently about trust, and it's a fluid thing. When there's no room for questions and wrestling, no faith is needed. And sometimes no faith is even possible. And, the freedom to question must be instilled early. Excuse me, and at home where it's safe, or it will happen out there in the world where you have no say whatsoever. And for those of us who were not allowed to question and were forced to accept what we were presented with, and often blindly, I just lost my we must learn the freedom that the Bible gives us to question, first and foremost, before we are safe enough people to be questioned. And without wisdom, the ability to know when to hold fast and when to let go, what to do and what not to do, and all the nuances of a real faith walk, it can become nothing but an exercise in fear-based legalism where others suffer for our inability to be flexible when the situation demands it. You see, teaching critical thinking when it comes to topics like evolution, sexuality, science, math, etc., and then shutting it down when it comes to the Bible is probably the biggest mistake we as parents can make. And I believe it is why our kids are experiencing such crisis when they leave our homes and find critical thinkers everywhere on the one subject that they weren't allowed to really even think independently about. And let me tell you, there is no more important subject on earth to teach our kids to think critically about than the Bible and their faith, because someday they will. And if it isn't with us, then someone else is going to be in control of the dialogue, and they're going to make arguments that fundamentalism and triumphalism aren't going to be able to satisfy if your kids are smart. Now, few definitions here. Fundamentalism is not all bad. And I agree with, some of its tenets, but we get into trouble when we try to force the Bible into the very modern box that says that every single verse means exactly what it looks like it means, and it's absolutely true, and there are no errors, tribal or otherwise, and that we must take everything literally. Fundamentalism never existed until very modern times, when the idea of evolution and some scientific discoveries brought certain elements of the text into doubt. Ancient people, for example, absolutely believed in a flat earth. Not just the Israelites, but every pagan nation, based not on critical thinking, but what they could see with their eyes and what made sense to them. And so it's not a pagan belief, it's just not a scientific one, okay? Because they started out at the beginning, and here we are, we've had to build and build and build. But until 500 BC, they also believed that brains were useless skull wadding, and that our thoughts originated in the heart and our emotions from other internal organs, okay? And so the Old Testament supports this belief, while in the New Testament, Jesus and Paul talk about thoughts originating in the mind instead of the organs. So, big change because of scientific advancements. God always speaks to us what we know, right? Now, as a scientist who's also studied the ancient world, I've got a degree in chemistry. I much appreciate that God spoke to Moses's audience in terms of what they could understand and not in terms of scientific accuracy. Because if God had been scientifically accurate, he would have had to invent new words and would have no way of even beginning to teach them what those words mean. And for that matter, it would still be beyond our understanding as well. And although it seems wise to tell kids that every word is literally and accurately true, which is important to us as post-enlightenment people, instead of being truth, which is based on the priority that the ancients gave to wisdom, it's also a recipe for disaster. God speaks to us where we are, and he spoke to them where they were, in the wilderness, listening to Moses tell the story of God's rescue plan to save humanity from the evils of sin and death that they saw all around them in the ancient Near Eastern world. It was not a book to teach them about science. They simply wouldn't have even understood the concept of a world that wasn't micromanaged by gods and goddesses, as evidenced by their continually worshiping regional deities alongside Yahweh throughout the Old Testament. And so in Genesis 1, God spoke of the creation of the universe in their modern vernacular of the building and furnishing of a temple. Made perfect sense to them that Yahweh was announcing that he had taken up residence as their God and King. We modern folks forget that the Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. And when we don't know what they knew, we can draw some disastrous conclusions. Disastrous not because they're wrong, but because they cause divisions and infighting when none are warranted. And we take up positions based on what makes sense to us. And of course, we pass that on to our kids, and they become locked into fundamentalist ideas that there is only one way to see what is written, and it's our way, not theirs. When that happens, we also tend toward elitism, as though now in all our modernity, we are the ultimate arbiters of what this ancient document written to ancient people actually means. We must always be humble before the text, and especially before our God, who is always generous and compassionate to communicate with us where we are according to our understanding and not according to his, because our brains are just, way too small. And we still know far too little. Triumphalism is another problem in Western Christianity. Triumphalism is the practice of religion that forces us to always be focused on victory, positivity, and personal and denominational glorification, and national glorification for that matter. We got that from Rome, by the way, the idea that we are marching gloriously onto victory, and we have so many hymns about it that we don't even question about it. Now, the problem is that triumphalism allows no discussion of the very real evils happening to our brothers and sisters in the contested regions of the world, where Christians have no political or, more importantly, military power. The Bible speaks of a non-triumphal reality of suffering and injustice in lamentation. And in fact, 40% of the Psalms are lamentations, crying out in agony, pain, confusion, and anger toward God over horrible circumstances. And an entire book of the Bible is dedicated to lamentations. It's even called Lamentations. Now, the prophets lament, Moses laments, David laments. We see lamentations everywhere except in those places where Christianity is coupled with power and military protection. But we must think critically about the reality of the historical church in the world, and we must teach our children to think critically about the triumphalist Christian nationalistic narrative, because it is not reflected in the Bible nor in the rest of the world. And when our kids are asked the hard questions about theodicy, which is the fancy name for how a good God can allow terrible evils, if they aren't familiar with the terrible evils described in the Bible and have only been handed empty platitudes, they will be, again, unprepared. Believe me, the Western church will not be victorious, but Jesus will be, and it's going to be a messy ride. And that's okay. And it's messy because relationships are messy. Faith is messy. And we should embrace the mess and teach our kids to do the same, or they will leave our houses so rigid that they will snap as soon as pressure is applied. We need to raise them up as children of the book, yes, but all of the book, and especially the messy parts. And we need to get to the point where we and they can do it fearlessly. We parents have been indoctrinated to believe that doubt is the enemy, but not allowing doubt is what we truly have to guard against. Do we answer a fool according to his folly or not? Back-to-back verses in Proverbs give us entirely different answers, because wisdom teaches us that life isn't black and white, but instead situational. If God is love, then why did the Canaanite genocide happen? Did it even happen, or is it an example of ancient hyperbole, literary exaggeration to drive home a point we see all through Scripture, because that is how they communicated? Are we afraid to really talk with our kids about the Bible? Are we only talking at them and telling them what we want them to accept, even if it doesn't tell the whole story? Kids are hypocrisy detectors, and when we homeschooling parents are on our soapboxes pontificating about the importance of getting our kids out of public schools because they aren't being taught to think critically, and then we forbid our kids to think critically when it comes to the most important book, the most important aspect, and the most important relationship of their lives, the house of cards is going to fall, and a lot of adults are never able to get over that because they lack the tools to reassemble their faith. Not upon the false foundation of fundamentalism or triumphalism or whatever ism that they were raised with, but on the foundation of God's salvific work through Jesus, which is the true meta narrative of the Bible. not young earth creationism, not the flood, not the identity of the Nephilim or Nimrod or Melchizedek, not how the divine name is pronounced or the claimed pagan origins of this or that doctrine or ritual or when the rapture or if it's going to happen. None of that. We need to provide them with the building blocks to reconstruct in case they deconstruct. We can't afford to simply indoctrinate them with what we want them to believe and say it's enough, because as we can see all around us, it's not enough. Kids are walking away, and who can blame them when we tell them to think critically when we ourselves too have often mistaken the adoption of alternate worldviews with a critical assessment of the situation. Believe what I tell you to believe. Accept my explanations. Don't ask those questions. Have more faith. Pray more. Don't listen to that other denomination or that scholar or that theologian, and you will be okay, just so long as you don't stray from our path. I mean, God's path. And so, I embarked upon this very unique ministry, this very strange ministry, certainly not the ministry I wanted or thought I was being prepared for. I had a series of dreams involving children beginning in 2004, where I was surrounded by 100 children, and none of them were biological. So you can imagine how terrifying that was. I had no idea, how that was going to happen. I didn't even want to think about it. I was absolutely terrified. That meant we were going to be foster parents to all 100 at the same time. But, I had no desire whatsoever to make that happen. So I just put it on the shelf, which is a good thing to do when God gives us a vision or a dream that we do not understand. Put it on the shelf until you understand it. 10 years later, a friend from Ghana, she had a vision about me that was almost exactly the same. Still, I waited. A year later, I had a dream about believing parents who were leaving their kids behind, so I went back to them. For them, I found Jesus with them, and he told me that the parents had gone off expecting to meet him, but he was lingering for the sake of the children and wouldn't be coming when they expected. But a year before having that last dream, God slammed me to the mat by giving me a very odd book to write, teaching serious Bible college level materials to children. And so I wrote Honor and Shame in the Bible, and the process was amazing. It was like it just flowed out of my brain in order, making perfect sense. But then, when God gives me a book to write, that's always how it happens. And I have like 20 unfinished manuscripts in my files of books I tried to write without him. It doesn't work. And, I taught families how to look at the Bible critically as a team, like scholars, in terms of honor, shame, culture, which couldn't possibly be any more different from our own if we tried. And I started getting feedback from parents because their kids were really getting it, and they were analyzing the text based on this one small subject. And they couldn't wait for Bible study because they were able to engage with the text in ways they never thought possible. And they were having family discussions and debates on what was going on based on this understanding. And parents and children were learning to see the Bible as something to interact with, struggle, and question their previous assumptions by critically looking at the Bible stories with a more ancient set of eyes. And it started to come alive, just like it did for me. And it all led to understanding Jesus and his mission better. And then came my volume on covenants, and it happened again. Kids were writing their own suzerain vassal covenants and exploring what it meant to be in covenant. By the way, some of those were really funny. They sent them to me. They were exploring what it meant to be in covenant through the eyes of Noah, Abraham, Moses, Phineas, David, and Jesus. They learned about kings and vassals and land grants and the difference between covenants, and treaties, and testaments. And they were understanding concepts that weren't very well understood just 100 years ago, but are now clear because of archaeology and the deciphering of ancient languages. And again, it all led to understanding Jesus and his mission better. Then I wrote a much needed volume on the ancient dyadic community mindset and a lot of the gruesome questions of the Bible, where only 15 of the 50 lessons were suitable for children. But I wanted to equip parents with real answers and real ways to begin to look at the text about sexuality so they could answer the questions as their children became old enough to ask them. I knew that these sections of scripture were very frustrating to those who are unacquainted with the ancient Near Eastern audience of scripture and the laws and mindsets and basic context of those times, how they thought and lived and behaved and what made sense to them, but was lost to us until just recently. And again, it all led to understanding Jesus and his mission better. That one's actually called, sexuality, social identity, and kinship relations in the Bible. Context for adults, actually. Now, my final volume tackled what being an image bearer meant to the people of the ancient world. And we explored some what if stories about how life could have been different apart from the rebellion in the garden. But the bulk of the book was about our new creation life and how we represent God as image bearers through the development of the fruit of the Spirit. And it was designed to make kids see themselves in the Bible, to enter in, to be a part of the story of God's rescue plan for humanity. And of course, it all led to understanding Jesus and his mission better. Kids are so smart and they're hungry to be treated as co-heirs in the kingdom, which they are. How we present information must be age sensitive, and yet we must be even more sensitive to explore and think critically ourselves. We can't be afraid of text, but we do have to respect it. We can't box it in as though we need to be kept safe from it, as though it could possibly give us an entirely complete picture of God, who's forced to communicate his ineffable, indescribable greatness through metaphors because there simply are no words that are sufficient. When they come to understand that God is bigger than the Bible, and the Bible is a tool to help us into a beginning of understanding just a glimpse of his majesty, the Bible can become their ally instead of their jailer. A companion in their quest to commune with our God and embrace him in all his complexity. And when that happens, they'll still struggle with the hard questions and the doubts and the confusion, but it will be with the Bible as a companion that speaks different truths in different situations, and not as an adversary who is cold, cruel, and detached from our struggles. We must give them a Bible that is like Jesus and not a Bible that fits into what we think we can manage and control. Jesus was unpredictable in his beautiful wisdom, never saying quite what we would expect or doing what we think he should or conforming to any standard of behavior that we can predict with any amount of assurance. As a matter of fact, I think he was asked 187 questions that he answered like 3. Jesus is complex. The Bible, therefore, is complex as well, and probably inspires more questions than it gives answers to. To honestly be in relationship with the God of the Bible and Sinai and the cross and the empty tomb takes a lot of stepping back and letting go of our need to be certain, which has reached idolatrous levels in the modern world. In reality, a God who can be predicted is a God that is small enough to fit into my approval zone and not big enough to rescue us from sin and death. When children can be told that, like Aslan, God isn't tame and manageable, but wild and good, he becomes big enough for them to trust with their lives, their fears, their sadness, their future, and their questions and anger as well. The God who fits in a box is generally either shockingly permissive or crushingly legalistic, and cares about what we care about and hates what we hate. The Bible tells different stories about God for the same reasons that our friends and families and neighbors can tell entirely different stories about us without any of them being lies. As we're complex creatures by design, God is even more so, and thank God for that. But his beauty can't be appreciated when we do not allow our kids to think critically about what they are reading and what it might mean, and to listen to other critical thinkers, and when they don't even know that it's possible to look at the Bible and see what it really does and doesn't say. When we take off our denominational, fundamentalist, triumphalist glasses and really delve into what it's saying, and yes, kids can do that too. A little at first, but more and more as they grow older and deeper in relationship and wisdom. You know, questions are only the enemy when we neurotically believe that we must have all the answers or else our kids are going to become heathens. You know, those fears are baseless, even though they are drilled into us by leadership that doesn't have all the answers but fears losing control, or by those whose ego do not allow an appearance of ignorance. But we are all ignorant. It's inevitable. We're all wrong about things. It's undeniable. We all have a very small and limited understanding, and that's okay. We all read things into the Bible that just aren't there. We have all fallen for urban legends and hoaxes. We have all made faulty assumptions based more on 21st century Western ideals and Hollywood than on the ancient context of the original audience. And one of the most valuable ways of teaching our kids to think critically is to openly admit when we find we're wrong and to apologize. And from experience, I can tell you that kids are used to being wrong, and it is so discouraging until they really understand that we as parents are wrong too, more often than we know. I always say that the only way I know to keep from being proven wrong is to stop studying and just never listen to anyone anymore. But that would be an illusion because I'd still be wrong. And it seems to me that when we love someone, you know, we don't want to be stuck with what we knew about them at any given point, but instead desire to know them more and more. But it requires thinking critically and reevaluating when necessary and listening to a lot of others and not being married to our denominational understandings or so enamored with any teacher, and especially me, that we put their materials in a place where only God deserves to sit. Too often we present our kids with what we consider to be the final word and do not allow them the opportunity to journey with God and with others because we are more concerned with orthodoxy, which is having the right ideas, creeds, doctrines, etc., with right in quotation marks, than with orthopraxy, which is what the Bible stresses. Orthopraxy requires a lot of critical thinking and is the bane of legalism, because orthopraxy is about doing the right things in the right ways at the right times. Orthopraxy tells us to love our neighbor and to love God with all we have. Orthodoxy tells us what that is and isn't allowed to look like according to black and white rules that do not allow for wisdom to have any say at all. The Qumran Covenanters, who were the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, who might have been the Essenes spoken of by Josephus, they were all about legalistic orthopraxy. Or legalistic the legalistic orthopraxy. Yeah. You do not break the Sabbath even to save a drowning man. So, whereas the Pharisees expected a person to break the Sabbath to save lives, as do modern Jews to this day. Discovering orthopraxy requires us to think critically. No, they did legalistic orthodoxy. What am I even talking about? Okay, so discovering orthopraxy requires us to think critically about the Bible and especially the Torah, but also about the Proverbs and the Psalms. Is the person who dashes the Babylonian babies against the rocks really blessed? Or was that the honest venting of a man who was at the rock bottom of despair? Do we answer a fool according to his folly or not? Well, it depends on the exact situation. Is it okay to beat a slave to death if it takes more than 2 days for him to die? What about the pilgrims who slaughtered Native Americans because they believed they were living in the new promised land and found permission in the book of Joshua? What was the Torah ultimately guiding us toward? The ministry of Jesus. And to end our oppression of others, a society to which many of the Torah laws, we're just grateful that is no longer our context, but they did represent an important trajectory out of sin and death into life and love. Everything begins somewhere. And being captured and forced to be the wife of the man who slaughtered your family, as horrific as we rightfully now see it, was far better than the battlefield rape that was considered a soldier's right in the rest of the world. Orthopraxy teaches us to weigh every decision by what love looks like to that person in that moment and according to their need, and there are no hard and fast rules. No detailed instruction manual outline every situation. The Bible was given to us as a guide to guide us onto wisdom and love, not to replace our need to think critically about what is actually good or bad in a situation and act on it. The Torah is good, but it only provided the bare minimum of behavior modification in the otherwise brutal and vile realities of the ancient Near Eastern world. And the truth is that without Jesus and a real relationship with him and an understanding of his ministry and teachings as the greater Moses, greater Solomon, the greater Jonah, and the greater temple, the Torah is very confusing, and especially for children. And so by interweaving the Genesis stories with archaeology, sociology, sound exegesis, history, and most importantly, Jesus, on my radio show Context for Kids, I'm teaching kids to go beyond the text into a living, breathing, struggling, questioning, happy, sad, real faith that is not simply a set of beliefs, but an outworking of trust in the inherent messiness of God being real, Jesus being real, and our relationship being with him being real as well. I don't want them to have a relationship with a book and a set of beliefs that leaves us no better off than Muslims or Buddhists or whatever. I want them to have a vibrant, growing, interactive relationship with the King of Kings, where they are allowed to do all the things that biblical authors did as they wrestled with God and knew him and knew that he knew them. And how many of them had not a scrap of Bible to even help them along? One last word, really. One pitfall of parents coming to an understanding of Torah after they were already believers is the knowledge of Jesus. And sometimes we take it for granted that we can read Torah portions to our kids and they can just pick up what we attained entirely through different means, by focusing on Jesus and his teachings and actions. But it just doesn't work, not in the long run. Jesus is the goal of Torah, which means that Torah serves Jesus and not the other way around. That's why Jesus clashed with the religious authorities who had turned Torah into an idol, and even more so their interpretations of Torah, which were more inspired by Hellenistic law codes than the ancient wisdom literature that was given to us by Moses. Jesus wanted them to see the point of Torah, but they were interested in legislating what they could find, what they could and couldn't get away with. Your kids need Jesus more than they need Torah, because only Jesus could walk out the true, long-term, non-culturally specific intentions of God that we could only guess at without him. Oh, there we go. That's it.
That's it. That was a fast.
That's
Well, that's
it.
it. And then that's it. Let me stop my
Yeah.
screen sharing of your picture. Did you like that? I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I look younger in that picture because I am younger in that picture.
Oh, I know I had your other one. I should have grabbed that one. Your newest one. It was cute with all your toys behind you. So we have a chat blowing up because this is really a fun topic in that one of the things I personally love about you, Tyler, is I love that you shake up the room. And that's one of the things I love about you, because for myself or others, we have a choice. Some people we choose to either, this isn't a time for to hear that, but what you encourage us, you push us, you goad us to think whether and you don't expect everyone to agree with you. That's what I love about you, is you're like, yeah, you probably won't agree with me. I hope you don't. Like, and you and I have talked before. It's like, I hope you don't agree with everything I say, because that's going against everything you're teaching. Or you're trying to encourage all of us to, as we're going through the word and as we're teaching it to our children, most don't understand, because I would love to, in your chat, tell me, if just say yes or no. If you grew up in in your home, maybe you were a fundamental Christian, and you grew up in that home, I wasn't allowed to question. And I had put in there earlier is that one of the things that I was taught was I didn't really think about being an adult, like you mentioned earlier, because I was always I didn't think about being an adult because I was told Jesus was coming, and it was always about that. It was about he was coming, so I'm not going to really worry about what I can, might as well just live my life because he's going to be here any minute. So that was how I grew up. But one of the things I was never allowed to do was to question. And let me know, I'd love to hear in the chat, were you allowed to question? Yes or no? I don't even know if I thought about questioning, because it was like the pastor stood up there, he taught something. I'm going to use the word loosely, indoctrinated. And again, that's a word that could be offensive to some people, but there was a lot of things that I was indoctrinated in that were amazing, that I'm glad I had that foundation, because now as I add dimensionality to my faith, I find that I may let some things go, but I can now build on that foundation, that it wasn't necessarily an indoctrination process. But I'd love to hear, some of you guys are saying yes, yes. It was questioned, was not welcomed. I questioned something one time in church and I was asked to leave. And it was not, it was seriously about like the children on Noah's, like didn't make it on Noah's Ark. It was a question I just asked on a Wednesday night in church, and I was asked not to come back anymore because I questioned. I didn't know, and I wasn't rude. And that's the number one thing we've talked in the chat is and I know Tyler's heart in this is that you're teaching your children to obviously to question things, ask good questions respectfully. Like you don't want your kids like, what does that mean? You're not teaching you're like, hey, okay, I hear what you say, but why? Tell me why. Then they can come back. And I think that classical conversations even has a whole section of their schooling where they teach the children then how to I will say defend your faith, but we're not wanting you to argue, but you need to know why you know what you know. And at some point it becomes for your children, it's got to be about their own faith and their relationship. Because if they don't know why they believe it, someone else is going to tell them. I mean, but it's kind of fun to people have been challenged, Tyler, and we are so a quick question. That's a good question. What did you mean by triumphalism?
Okay, triumphalism is specifically something that the Western Church does. It doesn't work anywhere else. And triumphalistic Christianity, we have to always be focused on victory. The American church is going to save everyone. We're not allowed to focus on social problems or real suffering because it's uncomfortable for us. But in the majority world, where Christianity does not have military backing and a whole lot of wealth, lament is how they relate to God. 40% of the Psalms are lamentation Psalms. You look through the Bible, it is not a victory book. It's a book about people going through horrible persecution and trials and sickness and everything. But it's amazing because triumphalism is an offshoot of prosperity gospel that even people who know prosperity gospel as false teachings have accidentally or been trained to buy into. You're not allowed to focus on, I mean, in the African American church, yeah. In Native American churches, yeah, you can lament, you can focus on God, why aren't you saving us? What's going on, and why am I sick? And da 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 da. But anyway, triumphalism does not allow that. It focuses on a triumphant church as opposed to a triumphant Messiah. It's, we got the victory. No, we don't.
Yeah, he's the victory instead.
Yes.
Yeah, he is the victory. Right. I love one of the girls here says the Bible should lead to redemption over victory. Yeah. This is the redemption.
Yeah.
And we hear that our Father, he responded to those that cried out and lamented. That's why he said, they were lamenting and crying out in Egypt, and that's why he brought them out. He heard their cries, he heard their laments. And so it's okay to spend those times. Right now we're told if our people who are humbled, right, will fall on our knees and pray, he's going to hear our laments, he's going to hear our cries and heal our land. But through, because of his victory. So that's awesome. Thank you. So much. Now, every way you can contact Tyler, you can do it. Look on your workbook, and I'm going to pull up this little spinner. See if we can do it. I'm going to hit spin. Oh, does it? I don't know how loud it's going to be though. Not loud enough, I'm sure. Michelle, you're the winner. Yay. So reach out to me, Michelle. We'll put my little hickey jiggy down here, my email address. Just reach out to me and make sure so I can get a book out to you. I'm going to put a Charlie dot the rooted. I'm going to put Charlie at the rooted cafe.com. Perfect. Yay, 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 Michelle. Yay, you're the winner. I know, I'm excited. I know this is crazy, but I love going through these children's books for myself because I feel like there's so much stuff that I've missed, and it's taking things down, and it's taking vocabulary down. She takes different covenants down, and I love Rewrite Your Covenants. amazing. I'm just going to say it's an amazing book to teach your kids about the 10 commandments and the covenants, and teaching them how to think it through so they actually understand what a covenant is. So you be blessed. Thank you, Tyler. We so appreciate and love you.